So, on this episode of the podcast, I spoke to a friend of mine, Sam, and Sam is a menstrual cycle coach. And if you don't know what that is, it's an education. And I did learn a lot. Um, and we got into conversations about the flow, the cycle, the energy cycles, the emotional cycles. And like with all of these things, you've got to be open to the education and understanding. And one of the things that Sam and I got into a lot is actually that one of the problems is the way we communicate and the barrier that can put in place. And hopefully, we both between us did a great job of getting over that. So I hope you enjoy the podcast, this episode, and please like, subscribe, or comment. And please do check out Sam. 2, 1. Hello, Sam. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Well, you're very welcome. Very welcome. And just for context, you and I actually know each other.
Yes,
Yeah,
quite a long time now, actually.
it's got to be. It probably is nearly. Is it nearly like a decade?
Yeah, about 8 years.
Yeah, it's got to be, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah, I never realised that. I never thought about it.
No.
Yeah. It's, so I've invited you on today because you have a kind of similar subject that I've discussed before, but from a kind of, well, I suppose this is pre-menopause, and actually the menstrual cycle is what happens before we get to before women get to the menopause. And I did do a long podcast with a lady called Corolla who was suffering from the menopause, and in that as well, we discussed the perimenopause, and the and one of the things that came up in that podcast that I wasn't aware of at the time is how little is known about it, how difficult it can be to get an actual diagnosis, and just how, quite simply, and you and I were just kind of discussing this me recording, how difficult it is to get into conversation with women about it, and yet it can be absolutely devastating. And I think, and I don't obviously have any personal experience of this, but it could be the same with menstrual cycles.
Hmm. It is. I'm amazed doing the work that I do about how little women understand about their own bodies, their cycles. And for myself, when I started getting into this work, and I was like, wow, why are we not taught this at school?
Yeah,
why why am I in my mid-30s and just finding this out? And so, yeah, part of my work is really to create this awareness of really the power and guidance that the menstrual cycle can allow women, and how much of a comfort that can be, and can really answer a lot of questions, I think, that a lot of women have. And once they realise what's going on in their body, they're like, oh, that's why that is.
you could.
It's a bit of an aha moment.
It is because I don't know. I'm not like the most up to date person with my history, but a lot of religious ceremonies going back were focused around the menstrual cycle, and it was, like hundreds of years ago, kind of before we became industrialized. Tribal awareness was much greater about the menstrual cycle, its purpose, when women were ovulating, when women were at their strongest, when women were at their best, and when women would kind of be quieter, and the reasons why that. And it was that they were much more in tune with their body and what the body was going through and what it meant.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, though back in the day, women were treated like an oracle for like a few days a month during
Yeah,
their period, because we're naturally a little bit more, well, connected to ourselves during that time, because of what's going on in our body and energetically. There's a lot more time for reflection and being a lot more insular, and that can create a lot more clarity around things. And so, yeah, we were fertility rituals. I mean, the fact that we can grow a human inside us is quite cool. So I mean, like, we were really revered as these, like,
Yeah, it's pretty
amazing
significant.
beings.
Yeah,
And
it is pretty
yeah,
significant. Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? You know,
yeah.
we won't dismiss it. Do you know what I mean?
Uh,
It's kind of how the human race developed.
yeah. And so, yeah, there were a lot of rituals and ceremonies, devoted to fertility. Um, and somewhere, in time, that kind of got lost. The Industrial Revolution kind of didn't really leave space for cyclical beings and people with cycles to observe their natural energies. And we've kind of ended up living in a more linear society. Um, just the way it is. It was, women didn't have a lot of say around, the Industrial Revolution kind of time. And so it is quite a male energies like world, and that's not a bad or a good thing. It's a neutral. That's just kind of how society is working in this 9 to 5 situation. Men have a different cycle of energy, that allows them to be a lot more linear. Without they have what women experience in a month, men fall have in a day. It's more of a the word has gone from my mind. Anyway, that kind of fluctuations we have in a month, you have in a day. So it
Mm.
means that you're able to maintain another level of energy, that we can't. And so, being as women, being sort of, well, uh, forced to work in a society that doesn't really allow us those to observe and respect those peaks and troughs of energy has caused some significant issues over time.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult one because pre kind of will it be pre-farming? So which goes
Mhm.
back, I think, about approximately 5,000 generations, which is roughly about
Mm.
10,000 years or something. Might be a bit longer. Up until that point, when we weren't farming, everybody just kind of it was more like everybody roamed, and you roamed a certain area, and everything was done. Everybody had their role within your, not only based on whether you're male or female, but your status in the group that you were in. It was with farming that we slowly, I think it was with the discovery of wheat, as in when we actually stopped moving around and stopped being nomadic and started farming wheat, that we then got stuck in these cycles that are more familiar that we see today, which is then where the cycles of the Industrial Revolution came along. Um,
Mm.
and interestingly, I only actually learned this today because I was listening to a chap talking about the history of coffee, of all things, and the history of caffeine. Because pre-hot drinks, everybody, including children, just drink alcohol because it was the only clean source of liquid that you could drink. You couldn't drink water because people didn't boil
Wow.
it. You wouldn't have hot water. So, like 1200s and all of that, all right up until about 1700, when people would drink tea and coffee. That's
Mhm.
when children, you just give them like a form of cider in the morning with breakfast. But everybody was constantly kind of drunk. Not in the way that we
That's
imagine
insane.
it. Yeah, not in the way that we imagine it, but it was the only clean source of fluid that you could drink, be it ale, mead, or cider, and which is a long stretch from what we were talking about. But it's the way that. So the reason, like, so things like, even then we were doing things abnormal. You know what I mean? It's been going on for hundreds of years, and you literally got up when it was daylight and you went to bed when it was nighttime, because things like
Mhm.
candles and stuff, unless you're in a monastery or wealthy, things like candles were too expensive to burn. So
Yeah.
it was just darkness, and we then, with that, we lost all of these moon cycles, all of these sun cycles, all of these seasons that we take for, well, we don't take for granted because we still don't know what that would mean if we were to go back to that sort of lifestyle. We've never experienced it.
Yeah, and even to an extent, in the farming community, we're still observing sort of cycles of the year and the our daylight, circadian rhythm. That's what
That's
I was
it.
trying to think of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I knew it would come back to me if I stopped trying to think it. Yeah, we're much more in tune with that and sort of the cycles of the year. I mean, we're wrapped in cycles as human beings, lunar cycles and their impacts, and the season, and having that sort of harvest and winter and eating seasonally, that was still sort of in play. But as soon as we sort of took it to this kind of like 9 to 5 kind of thing, that I think was the real pinnacle in us becoming
yeah.
detached from those
I think the
seasonal
last.
energies.
I'm trying to think. I'd say probably the 90s is when I started to notice. I don't think it was before then, because I still remember things like strawberries only being available at certain times. Do you know what I mean? Whereas
Hmm.
I'm sure it was about the 90s that we started to notice you could have whatever you wanted any time of the year. And I'm
Mm.
sure somehow that must have had an effect.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And and for women, it's probably like only our grandmother's generation, or depending how old you are, but maybe 3 generations have like been employed in work. Um, and yeah, as I think as a consequence of being in that 9 to 5 kind of structure, or some variation of that, it's created a lot of societal pressures around the expectations on those who have cycles and that bleed to maintain a level of energy that is not sustainable. And the impact of that is there's a lot of shame around periods, and what that means, that somehow women are seen less than because they have a period, or that they're seen as irrational or unreliable. Stay away from them, they're snappy. All of this kind of
But
stigma that goes along with it. And by sort of default of us having to push past, what our body is indicating we need, yeah, I'm not surprised we get snappy.
but the only thing is, I'm just going to put in a little caveat to this, because who
Okay.
who created these stereotypes? Because it wasn't men that started talking about them, and it wasn't men that
No.
made us. Did you see what I'm saying? We get a lot of flack for things that we're not really involved in, but then when we kind of
Mm,
take the jokes up. So in all of the relationships I've ever had, it's always the woman that's warned me, well, at this time of the month I'm going to be angry, at this time of the month I want chocolate, at this time of the month I want the blah blah blah. Right, okay. Do you know what I mean? And
but
it's
yeah,
what. So here's the other thing. What do you want me to? How do you want me to do something about it? If you can't control it, nor can I.
but that's the thing. We can control it, but as of yet, and I was very carefully not mentioning gender because I don't think that it's like on men that they've created these things. I think um, a little bit women have noticed these things in themselves, and somehow or another, between observation of partners and men, and women noticing these things in themselves, there has been this stigma that's become attached to periods and what it means to have them. But
I do definitely
there's
think there's a clumsiness around men when men. Do you know what I mean? Look, and the bottom line is some men are just dickheads. Do you know what I mean? And we'll just be
yeah.
stupid about stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But they're the same. In my experience, they're the same people that are dickheads and stupid about everything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That, do you know what I mean? Because you can either just keep your mouth shut or actually just show a little sort of sensitivity and empathy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I just don't think, and I'll get onto like a little bit more about the structure, and maybe it'll make sense. But a little bit, I think, because there hasn't been that education for women around their energy, at least not in a very tangible, clear way that women can relate to in their bodies. Um, there has been this kind of like, oh well, I'm not as good at this time, that kind of feeling of somehow not being as good, that I'm not as good as exercising around here, I'm not as good at my job around this time, and
Yeah.
somehow that's fed back to this idea that during your period you are less than, and that is not the case. And yeah, is it okay if I explain a little bit more about the
Yeah, no, the
structure
podcast
and
is
then?
is for the benefit of education and talking openly. Do you know what I mean? The
Amazing.
only caveat
Okay.
I'm going to have to put in though is we both need an understanding that there may be some clumsiness around this.
Yes. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
That's fine.
That's part of the learning process.
That's perfect. So in a menstrual cycle, there's a few things that are most important to know. So a period is not the cycle. A period is one phase of the cycle, and though cyclical beings or those that have periods at all times fall into one phase of the cycle, and there are 4 phases. So there will never be a day that goes by that we don't fall into one of those phases. So after the period, which is the time we bleed, there's the pre-ovulatory phase. There is the ovulatory phase and the premenstruum, and then we start all over again. And this, like on the face of it, doesn't. This is a physiology and 101. It doesn't really
No,
mean
but
very
it's actually
much.
quite important because it's actually to do with the reproductive cycle.
Yes. So what tends to happen in these phases is this is kind of like a real sort of snapshot into it. But the 2 main reproductive hormones women have are estrogen and progesterone. So from the cycle, if you're tracking and charting and counting your cycle days, it starts from day 1 of the period, the first day you bleed. And from that point onwards, so from day 1, your estrogen and progesterone are rock bottom. And for, on average, it's about 5 days, but it can be anything from 2 to 7 days a period lasts. Your estrogen and progesterone will be really low, and that will cause low energy in the body. So it's not that, oh, I think I don't, I think there's something wrong with me, or I think I feel like I don't have energy. I mean, we don't. It's just a fact. So that because of those hormones being at rock bottom, that causes like significant tiredness in the body. So towards the end of the period, the estrogen is a dominant hormone and starts to rise, and it will continue to rise until ovulation, where it peaks. And this, like for anyone that's into their sort of wellness or sort of more esoteric work, that's a yang energy. That's a very like masculine rising energy, because we all have masculine and feminine energies within us. And yeah, so that you can think of that estrogen like a really yang energy. So it starts low, and
And
by sort of day,
can I just
yeah,
clarify? And that's when
yes.
women become more sexual, isn't it? Is that correct?
So if you think yes, but only really towards the ovulatory phase. So if we were to look at this is the 28 day cycle is kind of like this standard template used. However, I'd just like to say that's not the norm by
No.
far. It's just often gets referred to. So cycles between 22 to 34 days can be or are considered normal, and most people fit within that
Which
kind
is
of
why
scope.
they tell women you should count your cycles so you know which one you are.
Exactly. But if we kind of look at 28 days, because it's kind of spoken about a lot, but yeah, but by no means is that like the gold standard. So by day 14 in a 28-day cycle, and with a balanced, healthy cycle, estrogen will have peaked, and that is the time where your libido starts to rise. Because if you think about it, in the animal kingdom, like if we weren't like evolved beings, what your body's trying to do is ramp you up to get pregnant, because all your body wants to do every month is just
but that's the problem,
churn
isn't it?
another
We're not
baby
evolved.
out.
We're not evolved beings. We're animals.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, yes,
but this is, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think this is one of the biggest problems we have in society. We try and pretend we're not what we are instead of understanding what we are. So
yes,
do you know what I mean? If we were truly evolved, we would understand our true selves, and that, like these cycles, actually, this is when you become more receptive and more productive, and these are the reasons why. Do you know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
Because we're part of an animal kingdom that has a cycle, and
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? And it's understanding those principles that help us actually evolve.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I'll
Yeah,
put it this way now, right?
I mean,
If you taught men, this is the horny cycle, this is the don't touch cycle, and this is why, they would be much more receptive to it. Because, and I'm not trying to belittle it, it's talking to them in a language they understand. Because
yes, I mean it's not quite so black and white,
but
but
you have to make the start.
yes,
The
there
thing
has
that's
to be
very
that starting conversation.
the thing that's very difficult when like you and I have had this conversation, and we've already discussed that this could get clumsy, right? And we're going to just be patient with each other. It's already out there, so we both know we might trip up on things, right? One of the things, I mean, I learned this through coaching and through doing podcasts as well, and just through coaching people and mentoring, right? Is we have to accept who we are before you can ever progress, right? And men are never really, like on certain subjects, going to be able to get a woman to understand their experience from their point of view. And women will never be able to communicate the menstrual cycle to men from from the way that you experience it and your point of view. And when I did that conversation, I had the conversation with Crowell, and we were talking about the menopause and stuff, we were discussing how you communicate it. And the best thing you can do with men is put it in a format that they understand, but don't expect them to understand your experience, because I can't experience a menstrual cycle, and nothing you do is going to help you there. Just like you can't be a 14-year-old boy walking around with an erection with no idea why that's happening, because our hormones are raging in a different way, and there's no way that the two can cross. And to go back to energy, that's the yin and yang, and you can't make one the other. Do you know what I mean? So one is yin, one is yang. They're always going to be that black and white, but it's how you communicate so that people know the boundaries, the rules. But there's too much focus on, you don't understand my experience. No, I'm not going to,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's very, for, not just genders, but, different
cultures, religions,
cultures,
generations,
sizes, shapes. Yeah. Like, we can only understand our own lived experience.
Can you imagine our grandparents listening to this conversation between a man and a woman on a public forum? They'll be like horrified. So we have moved on. We have evolved.
Yes, it's happening. But this is why I really want to take this information to women so that they can start to have the conversations, because it's not really until yes, it might be our lived experience, but maybe we don't understand it or recognize it all, which goes back to what you were saying. Like, we have to know ourselves, and maybe we're not that evolved because we don't really understand what's happening in our bodies.
I do think, like, without trying to stereotype, I do think men need to kind of get a grip of their education on this. I do. Do you know what I mean? But it's round pegs and square holes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But this part of the conversation is, for women is to, and where you can use different strengths in the cycle. There's different phases of the cycle that will give you different strengths, and using some of those strengths to help you have those difficult conversations and be open about it, because it's a much more empowering place to sit from, when you can say, this is happening in my body, I know that why I feel like this, and this is what I need to happen, and now I need to communicate that. It really is an invitation. Working with the cycle is really an invitation to be a little bit stronger about setting your boundaries,
Yeah.
and what you need and when, and respecting your energy levels, and for and not and releasing some of that shame and societal pressure that's that has occurred for whatever reasons. And so yes, I totally agree, there needs to be like a much better dialogue. And people that I work with and other people within this work, I know that their partners are really cycle aware, and in long-term relationships, their partners often spot their sort of transition
Yeah.
days between phases quicker than that they do, because it's I know my partner, he can spot sometimes shifts happening in me, and I'm like, oh, something's changed and I didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
And that is quite a nice place to be from. But it's part what would help build on that is this like deep awareness for women to have in themselves. So going back to what we were saying about the cycle phases, like yes, estrogen does rise just before ovulation, because if we thought of ourselves in terms of you know without our sort of conscious mind, our body's just trying to get us pregnant
Yeah.
every month. That's what it's trying to do. So if you think about it in those terms, the estrogen's rising, the our hormones want to like get us out of that hibernation cave into the world, makes us, it gives that kind of like this is me energy, maybe more like conversational, more sociable, maybe a bit flirty, maybe a bit horny, maybe just more outward. That's that yang energy. And so yes, uh theoretically libido does increase during that time. However, due to everyone having a different lived experience, that doesn't always occur in everyone, because there's not always that
Would
balance
would another
within the
way
cycle.
would have another way of saying it, receptiveness improves or is better, as opposed to just the term libido? Because it's not as simple as that, is it? It's there's a kind of a chemistry, a biological chemistry going on that is almost instructing the body to say, look, we need to think about making babies. Do you know what I mean? It's not
Yes.
it's different to the kind of the yang sex drive, if you like. It's not.
Yes. I mean, so inside the body, that's what's happening. But we have to also take into account the fact that we do have conscious minds, that we have different personalities and different things going on. And if someone is under a period of a lot of stress, then and I did make sure to say like that is the case maybe in a balanced cycle, but there's so many women with imbalance in their cycles, that where they don't get this lovely rise in
Yeah.
energy. Stress is like number one cause in imbalanced cycles. Cortisol gets involved, and what happens is, like, when you're experiencing stress, is that the body shuts down any like non
non
primary
Yeah,
functions. And
non-essential.
getting pregnant is not really a priority for a body if it thinks it's under attack.
No, but
So
that's
that
why when the first thing to go with men when they're stressed is their erections. It's not essential.
yeah
It's not essential for you to
yeah
survive. So you don't
yeah
need to reproduce right now. And it's almost a genetic, I'm going to say, and I can't prove this, but I'm sure it's probably out there somewhere. It's probably a genetic stamp that if you're not on your best, you shouldn't be breeding, because we are biologically animals. And in
yeah
any animal environment, when it's stressed, they can't mate.
yeah yes, because the body is trying to do all it can to sort of
Yeah, now's
do
not
all
a
it
good
thinks
time
it
to
needs
do
to
it.
do to
Yeah, but
yeah
it's now's not a
yeah
good time. It's like, because if you went back hundreds of thousands of years and you're nomadic or whatever, it's like, no, there's famine on right now. Now's not a good time to be trying to raise children.
yeah yeah
It's a kind of like an almost a biological safety check. Otherwise,
yeah
you'd be breeding in the most inappropriate times in the most hostile of conditions. So as soon as your
yeah
body experiences stress, no, you're not doing that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. But there's other factors as well. Perhaps if you are someone that's more of an introvert, going to find this time being in that yang energy really triggering, because that goes against your very nature.
Yeah.
You want to be like not so out there. And so, yes, biologically, there is this increase in fertility. There's lots of other indicators that the body has become more fertile, as well as that little increase in libido. But how the individual deals with that and negotiates through that, can be but so vastly
But I
different.
think that's the important thing, isn't it? It is individual, like you said. That the 28 day cycle, it just is bollocks. No pun intended. But do you know what I mean? It's just like it's just not. There isn't a perfect a gold standard. I think is the word you used earlier, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the menstrual cycle is so individual, and I think that again
yes,
that's a big issue around the topic.
yeah. Um, but this ovulatory phase is the one that gets kind of the limelight, because women think, oh, I only get like one good week of my cycle, and this is like the week. But there's actually a real there's so much, I don't know, magic to each like phase. I'm trying to think of a better word than magic. My woo woo coming out. But but yeah, there's like just this there is such a
Well, okay. Here's another way
rich.
of
Okay,
bridging the woo woo. Right? Is
okay,
you can refer to it as yin and yang energy. You can refer to it as historic energy, or
yeah.
it's simple biological chemistry. Now, what causes it? You can debate that with whoever you want for years. People
Mm,
are going to go down their own belief systems, but the fact of the matter is, something does happen within these cycles, and that starts off a chemical change, and that chemical change affects your mood emotionally. And there's times when
yes.
it's if you get in tune with that, as you were saying earlier, there's if you get in tune with those cycles, there's great times to start projects, to get enthusiastic, to charge after things, and to achieve things and
Hmm.
get things done. And then as it starts to phase into a different phase, that's when you can start doing self-reflection, self-care, and
Hmm.
kind of hibernating, if you want, for want of a better term. But it's being in tune with them and then using them all to get that balance, so that
Yeah,
you're living an optimal life between achieving and resting. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Being out
yeah,
there and then being internal and having reflection and expression.
yeah. And
There's all of these
and you,
things.
yeah, sorry, you just
That's right.
touched on something that's really important when you said restful, and I'll get on to the importance of that. But just to sort of finish the cycle, so after ovulation, then comes the premenstruum, and estrogen starts to drop significantly, and progesterone takes over as the more dominant hormone. And progesterone is like the yin to the yang, so of estrogen. So it's it has this very much more insular, kind of reflective, creative, but it's not like having no energy. It's not the same thing. It's more time like, think like wrapping things up, getting
Yeah.
stuff done in preparation, a more sort of like harvest energy, like you would do at the end of the year, getting stuff wrapped up. And this can be such a enjoyable phase to be in. But the thing that a lot of women experience is irritability, pain, discomfort, a lot of negative self talk and this kind of stuff. Um, but actually, if we were allowed more opportunity to rest during our period phase, that would have a knock-on effect. Because I always explain it like, you may imagine those like old Nokia batteries. If you go
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
your period with like one bar, if you don't plug it in or limit your usage, you're going to end up with a flat battery. I just like that
No,
old
but that
chunky battery
yeah, yeah.
image. But yeah, so it makes sense. Like, we have to limit our usage. Like, we have to like rest, allow ourselves to rest a little bit more. Like, your period is not the week to go above and beyond, it's the week to like rest. It is so very crucial in the rest of our cycle health to take a moment to rest. And that doesn't have to be like just booking 3 days holiday off of work, although that would be amazing. But it just means like yeah, like I said, like not going above and beyond that
Well,
week.
that's when you don't book a
Not,
dinner party for 10 people.
yes, that's exactly it.
It's when you don't
Our
do
estrogen,
sleepovers with the kids. Do you know what I mean?
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah,
you know what I
it's
mean. But
maybe
that's it,
like,
isn't it? You've got to respect that fatigue and
yes,
allow the
yeah.
regeneration.
Yes, and then what that means is we go into the cycle feeling much more balanced. If we take that time to rest, so round about ovulation, maybe there is that increase in energy because we allowed ourselves to rest. And then when we get round to the premenstrual phase, instead of us feeling like very like irritated and frustrated, it can instead be this like really beautiful time of creativity, of reflection, of like, it's a much more sort of me time. It's not the same as like just a complete time out, it's
No,
just a step back. And I really love it. I explain it like, when in autumn, when it's really bright and sunny outside, but then you get out of the car and then it's just like a definite crisp in there.
so hang on.
That's
I'm
like
just going
the
to say,
premenstruum.
are you saying that it's like if I approach you, it's like you appear warm and sunny, but you're quite cold and frosty? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Because that
not to
doesn't
the,
sound
not,
pleasant at all.
no, what I mean to say is it's more about, because the ovulation phase can be a lot about being out there and doing stuff for other people, and the premenstruums are more about doing stuff for yourself. So maybe you have a little less patience, and maybe it's like you're not such a people pleaser during this time.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to put like boundaries in, like limiting like social media so you don't go on and like all this comparison nonsense and imposter syndrome and like negative self-talk. Don't sort of we don't leave ourselves vulnerable to that. And I do get a bit sharper, but I think that's not like cold and frosty, just a bit like, no, I don't want to do that.
But I
And
think
no
that's
being like a
I
complete sentence.
but I do think that's important, that when these cycles come round, and is that actually, you like you saying, if you want to have the best of anything, or be at optimal performance, you have to recognize your rest cycles. You know, people talk about this in physical training and exercise all the time. You know, is any good PT will the first thing they'll want you to do is recognize your fatigue cycles, so you're not overtraining. And they will a good PT will tell people, stop training, you need to take 2 days off, 3 days off. And there's apps now out there now that track your sleep, the quality of your sleep, because these guys get really serious about it. And people kind of think it's all about, balancing, you can't get, you make your abs in the kitchen and all that. No, they're now measuring hormone levels, they do their bloods every 6 weeks, they track their sleep patterns, how the quality of their sleep. And and these aren't professional athletes, these are just hobbyist bodybuilders or strongmen, and they are that into, no, I didn't get this many sleep cycles in this week, so I'm not going to lift that, I'm not going to try that. I need to improve that recovery side of my life, so that when the energy is there, I can hit it at an optimal. And so why would I mean, and I know that's a kind of very black and white bloke way to approach it, but to me, why would the menstrual cycle be any different? If you're not going to respect the phase of the cycle you're in, how can you expect the next phase to be optimal for you?
Yeah, that I completely agree. And if we go back to the sort of before our conscious minds were about, the progesterone like is trying to sort of counter the sort of estrogen that's sort of like, here I am, let's get pregnant kind of
Yeah.
vibe to like, well, the body hopes that you've got a baby going on, and so it wants you to be a little bit more drawn back. It doesn't want you to like keep going out and being sociable, because it's trying to like now do its nesting. But then, it will realise, it's about between 10 and
But
16 days it takes to realise that it's not having a baby, and then our cycles will start all over
but
again.
there's a thing in, and I'm pretty sure it's a little undecided completely, but they're also pretty sure that, especially when you go back in time, because we've lost touch with so much of our origins as humans, of
Hmm.
how we were as a species through these different phases of the menstrual cycle. Like you said, women would change, hormones would change, pheromones would change, and men would be much more receptive to this. Because apart from a couple of species of chimpanzees, I think we're the only, and we're actually, let's just say, with mammals. Mammals are the only species that have sex for pleasure. Every other species, it's just mating. That's the only reason they
Hmm.
do it, is for reproduction and for passing on their genes. But we would have been much more in tune with the natural cycles, um, as men as well, because of, we would have been that there was the subtle cues, the subtle hints, and it is to do with the hormone changes, the pheromone changes, the body changes slightly. Lips can become more flush. You can start to swell in certain areas, and again, it's different for everybody. But through evolution, we were much more in tune to that on both sides, male and females. You know,
Yeah.
so like you say, after there was reproduction, so to speak, the body would just, okay, where are we? Is this going to happen now? Yeah, and
Yeah.
everybody would have known that. Everybody would have respected that. Whereas, like you say, now it's like, well, no, you've still got a 12-hour shift to do tomorrow. No one gives a shit.
Yeah, it is difficult. And and um, part of working with the cycles and understanding this information, I find it really helps to give my clients like a more tangible framework, instead of like the talking about our hormones and the way I've described it. And this really is a bit of a game changer when this sinks in. But one of the best ways, one of the best frameworks to layer over that hormonal cycle and the biological goings on in the body, to give it real tangible qualities of understanding, is to relate it to the seasons.
Yeah.
And so this was coined by a lady from the Red School, who the Red School have done a lot of work in this area for many years now. And this idea of layering it with the seasons was developed by one of the, I can't remember her name, there's two of them, by one of them. And so when we start to look at it like that, we can think of menstruation being an inner winter. And then that makes sense.
Yeah.
Winter, what do? You go inside, you sit on the sofa, you rest, you take time. The days are shorter. It's
Yeah.
really about being like cozy. And then we move around into inner spring for the pre-ovulatory phase. And so immediately there's that idea of this kind of budding energy, this, little sprouting seeds of potential, that rising energy. But you've got to be careful here, because if you go too big too soon, like if you've ever put bulbs out too early in the garden, and a late frost can just wipe them out.
I
It's
was
like
wondering
a
if you're going to mention frost. We're back to being cold and frosty. It started off sunny and warm. We're back to cold and frosty.
but what I mean is, it can be a very tender time,
Yeah.
not so much a frosty on the outside, but it's like, if you go too big in spring too soon,
Yeah.
then it can have a detrimental effect. So it's a budding energy. So if you go to like level 10 in your inner spring, it's going to cause some imbalance, some frustration, because your energy isn't quite with you. So then, no surprise, we move to inner summer. Ovulation, and this makes sense. That's that sort of like, this is
It's
me
full bloom.
energy, yeah, full bloom. So outside barbecues with friends, long days, that kind of energy, being sociable, talking. And then we come all the way around to the premenstruum for inner autumn. And then, yeah, it makes sense. It's this, sort of harvest time, that going inward, you're starting to wrap things up. It's not a time of like being sedentary. It can be an extremely productive time. It's just, it's not like with that like out there energy. It's more about being taking care of like internal things, being very creative. Like if you're at work, it would be maybe not the time to launch projects, but the time to wrap projects up. And then we come all the way around into winter. And when you layer on that framework, that is when like a lot of my clients are like, oh my goodness, like it just really lands for them in their
Yeah,
body because we understand the seasons, and that makes sense.
it does though, isn't it? Because that's what makes things tangible. If you can typically connect it to something that we understand really well, there are
Mm-hmm.
people like, oh yeah, I can get that, I can get that. And it's probably a good time to mention we haven't actually discussed at all what it is you do.
I'm a menstrual coach. So yeah, my official title is a menstrual wellness and embodiment coach, and so I um, coach women through working with their cycles. So really, when I talk about that seasonal structure, it is just one way of one framework of working with the cycle. There's other entry points to understand it, but yes, I work with women to help them understand the goings on in their body, so that they can then utilize them. Because that's the thing. Once we understand that, we understand like where our strengths lie and where we need to step back, and that gets, you know, things get really exciting then. And as somebody that's myself, I've been working with my cycle for 18 months, and it's been significant in my life, and shifting different ways I understand myself, utilizing my energy at different phases. I'm self-employed, so I run my business around my cycle, like 100%. So I know when to schedule in work, when not to schedule in work. And also, as part of what I do, I'm a qualified yoga teacher, so that takes care of the embodiment part, because what I've really found from experience is understanding, as I guess another framework, another entry point into understanding, is to really embody in a physical way how we're feeling. It can give a lot more insight, and there definitely is a very strong tie between our physical abilities at different times of the month, and to the point where women's football teams are now coaching with their cycle. Mainstream athletes are also being coached with their cycle. There's different injuries prone at different phases of the cycle. So it's now very commonly recognized that we also need to adjust our movement accordingly, to, like you said, take care of like our rest days, and work with the energy levels. And it's, in a nutshell, it's this consistent process of working with our bodies rather than against it, so that we're starting to release tension rather than causing more dis-ease in the body. But the more that I've seen my clients work with their cycles, the more like the things that they keep, like the more stones they keep upturning, the more like that I get it, like, and the more shifts there are. And yeah, it's
But it is, isn't it? Because
it's
if you can,
exciting.
it's like everything to, whether it's human beings, whether it's nature, anything like that. If you learn to work with something in the same direction and don't resist it, the path is just smoother every day, every time. It's
Yeah.
when you get to a point you're like, I don't want to do that. It's like, yeah, but you're going to be pushing water uphill and it's not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? It
Mm-hmm.
just isn't. So you resist it anyway, and then you wonder why. Oh shit, that's gone a bit south. That's all gone wrong. That's all gone sour. And you're like, yeah, well, the world's been trying to tell you that's not the way to do it. And with anything, when you understand who you are, you understand, and not just physically but emotionally. And this applies to everybody, men or women. It doesn't, I don't give a shit who's listening. It's if you have emotional cycles, physical cycles, whether it be around menstruals, whether it be around sleep, it doesn't matter. If you ignore the phase of each cycle, it's just going to become problematic, either emotionally, be it physically, whatever. But if you respect them, learn about them, and learn how you can be optimal emotionally, physically, when you need to rest, when you need to be respectful of them, your life becomes much, much better. It just improves because of that reason. You're in tune with your own natural energy flow, your own emotional cycles, whatever they are.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it just, there's so much to it rather than just, just thinking, okay, well, I'll do more stuff in summer and I'll do less stuff in winter. The impact is really huge. But part of the biggest challenge is really unraveling from the expectations and pressures put on cyclical beings from society, as well as those that they put on themselves. This
Is it
idea of being less than.
so? Here's another thought on that.
Mhm.
Is because the problem with expectations placed on society is it's a very good way of saying I'm not responsible for my inner society, my own self. It's
Mhm.
because there may be societal expectations, but you place the expectation on yourself.
Yeah, I hear you. There is a part of that, but you also have to get to a point where that you can see that I'm placing it on myself. There's a kind of an
Yeah,
awareness that comes with it. There has to be like a part of the journey already done to see, okay, yeah, I realize I thought they were societal expectations, but actually it's just what I tell myself, which
yeah.
is the case for everything. But
I'm
it
not.
kind
I'm
of
not saying.
feels.
I'm not saying the societal expectations don't exist.
Mhm.
I just think my issue with those terms is we forget we are society. You and I are
Yeah,
society. It's just like, well, actually, they're my expectations, then, aren't they? Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
But
yeah,
that doesn't
exactly.
lessen the pressure off them. Do you know what I mean? Or the
No,
emotional turmoil they can cause. I'm not trying to, because I know for some people it can be much harder than others.
it definitely can. And sometimes, there is outward dialogue against, or to sort of compound those expectations that,
Yeah,
that wasn't something placed on, I've experienced it, where, I've in fact made to feel like I should be doing better, but actually I've realised that the reason it's not that I wasn't doing better, it's not about being better or not better. It's just I wasn't at a phase in my cycle where I could, you know, match that expectation. And so, yes, for the most part, the pressures we put on ourselves, but they're also, and this is part of my work, is raising awareness around this so that A, we can start to release these pressures from ourselves, and B, that will have the knock-on effect of like educating a larger, portion of society as they sort of are released. But the shame, I think, that comes, because there's a lot of shame around periods. You're like, oh, that's gross, or like, from everyone, from other girls, can be equally spiteful. And there is when you're younger in your teenage years, to be told by a boyfriend you're gross, that is significantly damaging.
yeah,
Like as you go,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you just think, oh, I'm gross, and then that's just a traumatizing thing. and
But
and I just think with more education about it, that will, from both sides, and including more communication, if parents can teach their children in a different way, that will
but
start to be released.
but there's also, because this is a point you were saying earlier, that at certain phases of the cycle is you can become more inward and feel more
Hmm.
pressure, feel more self-critical. So if your clumsy 14, 15, 16-year-old boyfriend at that time says, oh, gross, That's not the time. It's not the time. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's going to hit really hard.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? But if it's at the other end of the cycle, you might be like, "You're such a fucking dickhead,"
Yeah,
and because
yeah,
you're feeling much stronger, you're feeling much more confident,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
and you
But
might actually kick him to the curb and realise he's a low IQ crayon eater. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yes, definitely.
Because some of this is
But
also gets wrapped up in because I just want to make this point because sometimes, and we'll keep this based on the menstrual cycle, but because self-esteem is a huge issue, right? Regardless of whether you're male or female, right? It's a huge issue for a lot of people. So if you unfortunately receive criticism at the wrong part of the cycle, especially with somebody that you're vulnerable with and intimate with, right? And that can crush your self-esteem, which leads into bigger problems that aren't related to the menstrual cycle. It's just at the moment that criticism had the biggest impact is because of the menstrual cycle, if that makes sense.
yeah, no, I hear what you're
Because
saying.
then if that carries on and you have low self-esteem and you're low in self-confidence, as cycles continue, it won't necessarily pick up again. You won't suddenly feel great and brilliant because somebody has said something that you've really taken to heart, and you lose that confidence in yourself. You lose that confidence in your beauty. You lose that confidence in your expression. You lose that confidence in who you are, what your self-worth is, what your self-value is. You know, so and I think this is like you saying, like when we can be so clumsy around these subjects that you then things you experience as a teenager are still affecting you when you're 30. I don't know why I'm doing
Mm,
all these hand gestures because nobody can see them.
yeah, I appreciate them. I can see. Yes, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we lived at least from those with a cycle? If we were able to live in a world where not only was it respected but perhaps revered as maybe it once was for for the wisdom that it's able to give women, um, and that are that children grew up, girls and boys grew up understanding that, and women especially grew up understanding it in themselves. It's a much more empowering place to grow up from, rather than getting like a really like perfunctory biology lesson on the cycle. Maybe we
I
get that in
agree.
sex ed or something.
No, I definitely agree. There's the thing. This can get very complicated and it can get very political, which is the one thing. I'm not about to get into another Twitter rant, right? But
No, don't.
the very things you're talking about are the feminine side of the reproduction cycle, right?
Yeah, which
The
I can speak from because it's my lived experience. I
right, yeah,
understand that
yeah,
I can't give the counterpoint for
right,
you.
right. So I 100% agree with you, but the problem is the 40-hour work week is an industrial masculine cycle.
Hmm.
So I agree 100% that we need better understanding, we need better education, better communication. But you can't have the yin without the yang. Do you know what I mean? So, and look, and I'm not proposing I have the answers, right? For crying out loud. If I've got the answers, you're in trouble, real trouble, right? But a lot of this is to do with we've lost, for various different reasons, right? Roles in society are changing, but the human species isn't. We can try and be as evolved. So, like, we're talking about how evolved we are, right? And we're evolving and being enlightened, but we're ignoring the female cycle and the female role, and we're ignoring the male cycles and the male roles. And I mean that with both responsibilities. Do you know what I mean? You can't expect females to take one role and excuse men from their accountability in the other role. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And vice. Do you see what I'm saying? you're
Hmm.
trying to blend both energies, but promote the female energy, if that makes sense.
I think I'd term it more give it space. We
I,
said earlier,
so I'm
I
using
don't.
energy because you use the terms yin and yang.
Yes. Okay. So we touched on it earlier, saying like you cannot make one the other. They are their
Yeah,
own entities, and we all like, and I, I'm. It's. I never mean this conversation ever to be kind of like a male bashing conversation. It's
no,
not
no.
that.
I think we've actually
It's
done a
not.
pretty civilized job of having a
Yeah.
conversation about it. So,
It's just realizing the fact that there is a lack of awareness and education that has caused that has gone to cause as well this negative dialogue and shame that goes around it. But it's not really a kind of a replacing of a
no,
thing. It's just creating an addition. So we don't want to just say, okay, well, now we just need to like promote females. It's just because we do live in this masculine energy society, it would just be nice to be able to create the space also to express our female energy, which isn't currently given the space. For example, in some countries, and I can't remember off the top of my head, that somewhere like Sweden or something, companies are introducing a period policy in the workplace, which gives women the first day of their cycle off because they understand that giving a woman time to rest during the time she bleeds will be better for them in the long run because they'll have taken that time and they're then more productive later. And also, as an employee, a woman is benefiting by for her mental health, uh, receiving this time of rest. So it's a bit of a win-win. She's more productive later in the workplace, and for the company, and she's also getting some time for herself to rest when she needs. So there are like incentives being like that. So it's
I
not really like we're not replacing a system, we're just creating a different
I
way to
can
be inclusive.
yeah, I think I have heard about some of these companies. I'm always interested to know what the work involved is.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And because look, in terms of like you said it yourself, you're able to do your work around your cycles, right?
Hmm.
I work in care. I wouldn't be able to do that around a woman's cycle. That I work in care. It's a 24/7 industry in a business. I wouldn't be able to do a rota around a woman's cycle. But it probably doesn't. And Jesus Christ, I could get shot here. But it probably doesn't have the same demands that a factory job or a high profile job does or a high stress job does, that it would have the same impact on cycles, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
And I get this.
go on.
Sorry.
No, no, come on.
I was going to say, I get this question asked me a lot as well. Oh, this is a really nice idea, but I'm a really busy mum. I've got a job and a house and da, 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 I've got everything going on, and my work is certainly not going to like incorporate a period policy to give me the first day of my period off. And okay, but that doesn't mean that you still can't work with that energy. It means
I
maybe
I'm sorry. I think the point that I was sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The point I was trying to make is, I think the best way that this moves forward is identifying the work environments where that is easily manageable and how it's manageable. Do you know what I mean? Because there'll be some jobs, some roles that actually you could manage that. And what I'm saying
mhm,
is, I don't know all of the details of these companies. Right? I don't know how they're financed, how they're making their money, what it is that they're doing that is productive. Do you know what I mean? But if we can get to a place where we have the dialogue about it, you might be able to identify industries where actually this is really manageable to do things like period days. And like you say, long term, that becomes much more productive for the people, much more productive for the company. And then
mhm.
recognize industries that's not as viable. So like, I don't know why it come to my head, but I'd imagine if you're a trawlerman going out into the middle of the ocean, a period cycle, we can't work around that. We got to chuck out nets when they've got to go out. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and it's a relatively like new concept,
Yeah.
and like every new new you know policy, in all respects, there are always like teething issues to be worked out, but it's just about maybe companies exploring that idea, seeing what might be possible. And even if a day off isn't possible, then maybe, lighter tasks or not as heavy tasks. I see like where you're coming from. And yeah, maybe in a sort of office situation, that's going to be much more
Yeah.
manageable because there's often like projects to be worked around, and
Mm.
that can be scheduled. And the more sort of responsible you are for your own workload,
I mean, I'm just
the
saying,
easier
I
that is to schedule.
honestly don't have enough information on it, but I think it has to be
No.
something that's worth exploring, because
Yeah.
from a business point of view, surely if it's manageable, it's manageable, and
Yeah.
it's going to be more productive. Do you know what I mean? And it's, but like I said, I don't have enough information or enough knowledge to understand where it can be done and how it can be done. But do I think it should be explored and explored? Because sometimes when we explore things and we come up with, no, that doesn't work, we don't ask why it's not working. And is there a
Hmm.
solution to why it's not working? Because we do live in a society that has changed massively. So we, like you say, like one of the definitions of being evolved is recognizing the needs of everybody in your society. And the way we do that is explore ways that society can become more functional.
Yeah, I
It's a very
agree.
black and white way of looking at it, I know. But
Yes. But yes, definitely something that should be looked at. And in the meantime, while that's not becoming a mainstream policy within the workplace, there's lots that can be done, within the structures that we work in, um, to observe these energy levels, self-employed or not. And sometimes, in terms of resting during menstruation, if you can't have the day, if you can't have a day off, then maybe it's possible to take, little pockets of time. It means not going into work early that week, certainly not staying late, because nobody has to do that. We're employed, for or contracted for X amount of hours. There should be at least a phase in the month where overtime is not the expectation, and taking full lunch breaks. When I was working in a sort of 9 to 5 office job, I was the only one that sat and took the whole 60 minutes. Like everyone's so keen to work through, but doing things like that,
we all know that person.
maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe on, for mums on the school run, maybe they can team up with their friends, and their friends can do the school run for them when they need to take rest, and they can return the favor. Or not going above and beyond, like communicating with our partners more about, "Do you know what, I really need some help this week. Like, I can't just power through and cook dinner and do washing and all the other things that normally I don't mind, or that I have the energy to do. This week I need some help." And
So
it's about,
I can help with that bit, because I discussed this with
yes,
Carola when we did the menopause. Right. So
yes.
ladies, if you're listening, when it's that time of your cycle, do not tell your partner, I could do some with some help because of this. Give him a chores list and tell him what you need him to do, because he'll understand that.
Good knowledge.
No,
Okay.
but seriously,
Right.
when Carola and I were discussing that, right,
Yeah.
this is what we realised. It's just like, no, it's how you communicate. I need help because of this. I don't know what help is. I don't know what you
Yeah.
mean when you say I need help. So don't tell me I need
Mm.
help. You can put it help chores list. That's fine. I can understand the go-to code of, okay, it's help week, right? But in help week, write it as a list. On Monday you do this, on Tuesday you do that, on Wednesday you do that. And it doesn't matter whether it's run me a bath, put the kids to bed. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter if it means Tuesday go and do the shopping, right?
Hmm.
Structure it in a way that a bloke will be receptive to it. because he'll understand instructions and orders. But when you say, I need help, I've no fucking idea what that means.
Yeah, it's too
Because I would
broad.
never.
It could mean anything.
Exactly. Because I would never say to one of my mates, I need help. I say, I need a help moving the sofa. I need a hand. Can you pick me up on Tuesday? It's, I need help. I need hand. A hand is then followed with the instruction. And that's how we communicate. So I know it sounds incredibly boring because you should just know. We don't. And it doesn't matter how much you bang on at us about it. We're not going to know. But give us a list of instructions and you realise we read quite well.
Well, I think this is where the beauty of having this conversation with the opposite sex, this is where like the revelations start to come up, because this is the communication that's needed to have. Like, but I think women don't feel like, for whatever reasons, their own expectations of themselves, or their own self-esteem that's happened, but they don't feel like they can communicate that, because somehow it makes them feel like they're being less than, because they can't maintain that sort of inner summer superwoman status.
Can I give you a bloke's perspective?
Please.
Right, okay. So this is how we experience it. When you talk to your friends and say, I just need help, they all say, yeah, I know. We've no idea what it is you know that we don't. Because it's an emotional experience that we don't have. We don't have it. So when you're talking to your female friends and it's just like, he doesn't get me, he doesn't understand me. We're nodding in agreement, because you're right, we don't get you and we don't understand you, right? And we can't, because we don't ovulate, we don't have menstrual cycles, right? So, and then you feel ashamed, you feel embarrassed, you don't feel at your best. And I'm looking at you thinking, well, I still think you look great in those hot pants. Do you know what I mean? I can't see a physical difference. You are an absolute emotional turmoil in a roller coaster. I can't see that and I can't feel it. And I have nothing tangible to put me in that place. Right? But if you give me like a code, like, okay, that's help week, right? Help day starts here. Here's your list of things I need you to do. We will just get on with it because we understand that.
Yeah.
The problem is you try and bridge it, and I'm not saying that alleviates your frustration as a woman. I'm just explaining we are not going to experience. Here's another way. I'm never going to experience a woman's orgasm. You're never going to experience ejaculation. But we never try to pretend we're going to. But you want understanding for a physical thing that I cannot experience. But what you need is for me to be helpful and to actually ease everything that's going on in that cycle, in that phase of the cycle. You need me to do things without being told, but you don't want to give me a set of instructions.
That is sometimes the case. I don't think it's the case for everybody.
No. I mean, we are generalizing.
Yeah. But I do agree. I mean, for myself in my own relationship, I'm very open about like what help means, or
just you're a menstrual cycle coach. So.
Yes. But I also, I'm in a long-term relationship and I understand the way my partner works as well. So it's a bit of give and take. Like it's quite difficult to do, like in a new relationship, like talking about any personal thing.
Oh Christ, yeah. It's a minefield.
Yeah, like that minefield. Let's not go there. But in a long-term relationship.
Well, no, because let's be honest, right? In the early terms of relationship, it's can I touch or can't I? I was a don't touch week. Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, that's all that's important. But sometimes it's not so black and white, and this is where we get back to like being like a lived experience. Like some women don't touch week will not be the same ones as other women's, and it might not even be that there is like a don't touch week. It's just about, again, like having a conversation, and in all always, like in relationships, removing that kind of like awkward, and whether they're society or self put on shames, but removing them and being able to like communicate with each other, especially in like long term relationships. I mean, I know my partner, I know how he ticks, and I know how he needs to like understand information,
Yeah.
which, is clear and directly. And so when I need to communicate my needs of like what help means, it can be really clear. But I think this framework that I spoke about in the seasons is a really nice way for like both to understand in a more tangible way. Men understand what spring, summer, autumn, winter means, and if a woman can sort of put it in that container and explain it in that way, it makes it understandable for both people to in the relationship to be able to understand what that means. And then that's got you on a kind of like, okay, we're singing from the same page. Now, this is what I need help with in winter. I need help with like cooking and cleaning, X, Y, and Z. Make a
Yeah,
list.
but
And
that's what I'm saying. That's what men need to understand. That's what needs to be communicated to men. Is when you say
yes,
help, what help means. Do you know what I mean?
yes,
Do you know what it is?
yes,
It's help means do not book a fucking night out with a load of people. We're not doing it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Do not invite people round. It's not happening. I will not be happy,
yeah,
right? No,
yeah,
it does mean you need to take care of dinner that day. You need to go and do this shopping. You need to, do not ask me to pick up something for you. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
It
yeah,
it's keep the diary clear. I don't need extra, but you have to explain to men what that means. If
yeah.
you look, I'm not saying different people will have different partners, but if you're having problems with your partner, that'll be why. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, more direct. Yeah, I did. Men very much enjoy that sort of logic in a situation
It's
and
how we talk
understanding
to each
things from
other.
that. Yeah, yeah, and even
Look,
my
you with
dad.
respect, right? Yeah, yeah. But with respect, you and I know each other. I know who your partner is. You've seen us all together. It's
Yeah,
brutal.
it's so brutal. I have to say.
That's how we talk to each other. But we're actually all good mates.
Yes, yeah. As an experience of being the driver for the evening and showering my partner
Yeah,
and hanging out with you guys for the evening, I was like,
yeah,
I'll just be over here. But yeah, no, I get that. But even my dad, bless him, and he's really supportive of everything that I do. And he said to me, he said, I wish that I was taught this as a young boy. He said, I just thought I needed to stay away from your mother during this phase because I didn't understand and I didn't know what to do. And and that's basically what we've been saying, is because
yeah.
he didn't know what to do. And there is like this communication that needs to happen. And if we had the better education, or at least there were,
I think
spaces for more conversation and
I
awareness from both sides.
I think the element that needs to be understood is communication, right?
Yes.
And the thing that I think always trips up is men try to communicate, and again, I'm stereotyping, right? But you're a menstrual cycle coach. I also coach people on self-esteem and performance, right? So you and I have a very different way of communicating to different people,
Hmm.
right? So you and I will adapt how we talk and the language we use to talk to people. It's kind of our skill set, right?
Yeah.
Generalizing through public, it's if you want somebody to understand. So you and I know this through coaching. If you want somebody to understand a point of view, you talk to them in their language, the way that they would explain it. And that's what I'm saying is sometimes a lot of this gets missed with men because you try and explain it to them as if they were a woman. And they're just going to sit there and eventually just nod in agreement. And then you get angry because they still don't get it. But they're
Yeah.
like, I
It,
understand. And
yeah,
it's like,
it is really challenging. But half of the problem is women not having this awareness
well,
in their own
themselves. Yeah.
bodies
Yeah.
of themselves. I mean, the scary thing is it's really not uncommon for a woman to feel like once a month she wants to break up with her partner. And that's how bad
Yeah,
like an imbalanced cycle can be. And that's not okay. That's not normal. And I'd just like to say that, periods, extremely heavy periods, painful periods, imbalanced periods, extreme PMS, they are common, but they are not normal. That's not how the body, in a balanced cycle should work. And it's not okay to feel like once a month you want to break up with your partner or your husband.
or to want to snap
And
his neck.
yeah, but for women to be able to have this awareness in their own bodies of what's going on, I mean, I hope, because once you have that awareness and once you start working with it, it kind of opens the doors for more things. Like I said, I like to use my sharpness in the inner autumn to like be able to set those boundaries in place for myself and be like, this is not okay. This is
Mm.
what needs to happen. This is what I need help with. And and boundaries in all ways, in all sort of schools of thought are really important. Setting them for ourselves, for our physical, emotional, whatever needs they are, to respect our own boundaries and what we need. And so by being able to set those naturally leads on to being able to have a conversation where to say, this is what I need to happen.
Mm. So I'm just getting conscious of time now.
Yes, okay.
That's right. So what would you like so if somebody's coming to see you, what would you like them to do? Is there a preparation? Is there something they're going to take away?
So I say to everyone, you start where you are. You start exactly as you are, where you are. You don't need to have done anything or know anything or have done any work. If you are a person who has had a cycle, because we haven't even touched on that. That's like a massive conversation. If you are not all women bleed. Not all those that bleed are women. That's just a fact of the age we live in. And there's lots of reasons women might bleed: hysterectomy, menopause, pregnancy, PCOS, like so many different imbalances. And so there are other ways of working with a cyclical energy, even if you don't have a period. So you literally just need to be curious and have a desire to have more joy in your life. I mean, that's really what I say. This is about finding more joy and balance, and that's what the menstrual cycle can bring. And so there's nothing anyone needs to have done or be doing, just an openness to want to create change. It's the same, old same. If the first step in creating meaningful change is awareness of a problem, and if you're aware that there's a problem in or something that's not bringing you joy, PMS or imbalanced cycle, any number of like imbalanced reasons, whether that's PCOS or just really bad PMS, or whether you're fed up and tired and fed up with your body and blindsided by your cycle every month, frustrated that it keeps catching you unawares, you keep going on holiday, you keep having a period and it's really annoying.
Yeah.
For any reason, like just that little curiosity to wanting to understand your body a little bit more. And I like to describe the cycle like an internal compass. That's the best way. It's an internal compass that can guide you to a whole new level of wisdom inside your body that's been there the whole time, and just creating your awareness around that. And that's, to want to delve into that a bit deeper is the only thing needed. A curiosity and a desire for more joy.
Well, then that's the perfect place to stop. Thank you very much.
Yeah.